There is a paper, Antinatalism is Incompatible with Theory X by Fumitake Yoshizawa. And I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm saying that name wrong, so apologies. But the paper is interesting. Before we can understand what the paper is saying, we need to know a little bit of background. Derek Parfit was a philosopher who was studying population ethics. While doing that, he posed three problems: a non identity problem, repugnant conclusion, and mere addition. And he said that there must be a theory which can solve all these three problems at the same time. And he called this theory Theory X, which he was in search of. We'll look at what these three problems are, but that's what he was saying. Benatar has claimed in Better Never to Have Been and in other books of his that antinatalism derived from his axiological asymmetry provide solution to all these three problems, and therefore his theory of antinatalism is compatible with that theory X which Derek Parfit was in search of. This paper is claiming that that claim, Benatar's claim that it is compatible with antinatalist theory is compatible with theory X, is wrong. So the paper is not criticizing axiological asymmetry. It is not criticizing the derivation of antinatalist conclusions from axiological asymmetry. It is also not objecting generally against antinatalism. The only objection it is raising is David Benatar's claim that his antinatalism theory provides solutions to these three problems, non-identity, repugnant conclusion, and bare addition, is wrong. Why is that wrong? To see that, we first need to understand what those three problems are, how Benatar solves those problems, and then see why this paper is saying that Benatar's claim is wrong. So let's look at what is non-identity problem. Non-identity problem is usually articulated as a comparison that a scenario where I can have a child right now, but I have some genetic problem and that child is going to inherit that. And as a result, that child is going to live a very miserable life. It's going to suffer a lot in compared to rest of us. But instead, I wait for 6 months, I get my problem cured, and then have a child. It would be a healthy, normal child. Now, our intuition generally is that I should wait for 6 months so that I prevent suffering of the child. The problem here is that that child which is going to be born after 6 months is going to be completely different child as compared to the child if I have it today. So what we are saying essentially is that it is better to not bring this suffering child, or let's call this miserable child, into existence. And we think it is good because we are preventing harming that miserable child, preventing the suffering of that miserable child. That is our intuition of this non-identity case. Derek Parfit has provided the definition of that harm part, which we said that we are preventing harming of the child. He says that we are harming a person if we put that person in a situation which is worse off than an alternative situation they would have been in. Now, in case of this non-identity case where we are preventing existence of a child, if we bring that child into existence, they are going to be suffering. We have to say that they are harmed. But the problem in saying that they are harmed is that the alternative situation is where they would not have been at all. So they are not worse off than they would have been if we bring them into existence. The implication of that is that it is not bad to bring suffering child into existence, which runs completely counter to our intuition, which we started with. This is the non-identity problem. David Benatar has proposed a solution for this through antinatalism. He says that along with worse off, if we also consider that if a situation is bad for a person in and of itself, then we can say that the person is harmed. And then if we accept the axiological asymmetry, we can say that starting a life is always bad for the person because that life involves suffering. And therefore, we are putting that person into a bad situation. And therefore, we are harming that person. And therefore, it is better not to bring that suffering child into existence. So, David Benatar has provided us a theory which aligns with our original intuition that bringing that suffering child was bad or not bringing that suffering child was good. He provides a theory which justifies this intuition. That is how Benatar solves this problem. What this paper says is that there are two parts to non-identity problem. It distinguishes between the intuition where we say that it is good not to bring that suffering child into existence. That is one part in our original intuition. But there is also a second part to our original intuition, that we think that only in these some cases it is good to prevent existence of the child. We don't think that in all cases it is good to bring children into existence. So we think that in some other cases it is good to bring children into existence. That is the distinction we have in our original intuition. And David Benatar theory, this paper says, does not provide any justification to this paradox. It just rejects this paradox, and it says that because starting all lives is bad, bringing anybody into existence is bad. It doesn't solve this paradox, and therefore this paper says that Benatar's claim that it solves non-identity problem is not true. I have my own opinion of this, but I it's not well studied. I mean, paper just came out this week, so I need to think about it. I probably need to ask a few people about my opinions. I would rather wait for some philosopher to talk about it, and the best would be if Benatar responds to this. Anyway, let's look at the next problem, which is repugnant conclusion. Repugnant conclusion. What is repugnant conclusion? It's a problem in population ethics which comes from a principle that we have to maximize the total happiness of people. So if our principle is that we want to maximize the total happiness, we can imagine two worlds. In the first world, there is small number of very happy people. So the total happiness is very large amount. And we can compare that to another world where there is large amount of people, but they are only slightly happy, such that an individual is only very slightly happy. The level of happiness of individual is very small. Their lives are barely worth living. But the total amount of happiness, because they are such a large in quantity, in numbers, the total amount of happiness in that world exceeds the total amount of happiness in this world of small number of happy people. Then we have to say that a world which has large number of very small happiness individually, or large number of people who are barely happy, whose lives are barely worth living, is better than a world with small number of very happy people. That runs counter to our intuition, and that is where this repugnance comes from, that this is a repugnant conclusion. This is the problem of repugnant conclusion. Benatar provides many different solutions to this. There's a long write-up in Better Never to Have Been. But one thing he highlights, that instead of focusing on maximizing the total happiness of people, if we focus on minimizing the total unhappiness of people, it solves the problem. Because there is a mathematical asymmetry in this. The maximum happiness has no limit. It is infinite. Minimizing unhappiness has mathematical limit of 0, because minus unhappiness would become happiness. So if we focus on minimizing unhappiness, then we can say that a world with large amount of slightly happy people, but mostly unhappy people, would be worse, because the unhappiness is more than a world with small number of people who are very happy. And that's how it solves the repugnant conclusion. This paper provides a repugnant conclusion for Benatar's version. It says that if minimizing unhappiness should be our focus, then we can imagine a world where there is small number of very unhappy people. So the total unhappiness is very large in this world, but only small number of people are there. And we can compare that to a world where there is large number of very happy people, but in every individual there is only slight unhappiness, such that the total unhappiness of that large number of people world exceeds the total unhappiness of this small number of unhappy people. And if reducing unhappiness, the total unhappiness, is our principle, then we have to say that the world with small number of very unhappy people is better than a world with large number of very happy people. That also runs counter to our intuition. This is the repugnant conclusion version against David Benatar's solution to the original repugnant conclusion. Again, I have opinion on this. Of course, it's not a well thought opinion. So I'll wait for some philosopher to respond to this also. If we want to get away from repugnant conclusion, we can modify the principle that we want to maximize total happiness. Instead of that, we can say that we want to maximize the average happiness. So we take the total happiness of the people in the world and divide it by the total number of people, and we get the average happiness. If we do that, then we can say that the world which has large number of slightly happy people is not better than a world with small number of very happy people, because the average happiness with small number of very happy people would be more, would be greater than the average happiness where there are large number of people who are slightly happy. So this solves the repugnant conclusion problem with this principle. But this principle gives birth to another problem, which is called as mere addition problem. So you can imagine that there are a certain number of people in a world with certain average happiness. And now we have to decide whether to have the next generation, whether to add new people into this world. Now, if the average happiness of that next generation is going to be lower than the average happiness of the existing people, then going by this principle, it is bad. It is bad because we are reducing the average happiness. But there are two problems with this. One, it runs counter to our intuition that adding new generation of people whose average happiness is only slightly less than the existing, but who generally have very happy lives and lives worth living or lives worth continuing is bad. That runs counter to our intuition because we think it's good. The other problem is that then we have to compare with ancestors because we have to compare the average happiness. So we end up in a situation where while deciding to have a child, we have to take into account average happiness of our ancestors thousands of years ago. So if there were some ancestors in Egypt who had very high average happiness, we have to make sure that the next generation has higher average happiness than those ancestors thousand years ago. This absurd situation is what Derek Parfit calls as Egyptology. And because it implies or results in this absurd situation, it is a problem. So this is the mere addition problem. And we can do these smaller mere additions any number of times to get these absurd conclusions. David Benatar solves this problems in two ways. First of all, he says that mere addition is not a problem at all. If you think that starting any life, no lives is worth starting, if you think starting any life is bad, then there is no problem in accepting that mere addition or adding some number of people is bad, whether it reduces the average happiness or not. So he's first of all rejects the mere addition problem to be a problem at all. But then you can also say that what about the case where the average happiness of the next generation is going to be higher than the average happiness of the existing generation? That then fits in the principle of maximizing the average happiness, but that runs counter to the principles of antinatalism. That is a problem the paper also presents. David Benatar then talks about solution to this problem also, which is the second part of the solution to the mere addition. He says that instead of focusing on maximizing average happiness, we should focus on minimizing average unhappiness. And again, mathematical asymmetry, the minimum average unhappiness can be zero. Now, you can also then construct a problem, the paper talks about this, where the average unhappiness of the next generation is going to be lower than the average unhappiness of the existing generation. And that also then we makes us compelling reason that we should have that mere addition of problem, which runs counter to the principles of antinatalism. So then if we want to solve this contradiction, we have to accept that the only acceptable minimum average unhappiness is zero. And you can have that zero unhappiness only with zero number of people. And therefore, the paper says, and I don't fully agree with this, the paper says that the only way to achieve zero average happiness is to kill all existing people. And but then with this pro-model conclusion also antinatalism doesn't agree. Benatar is not for seizing existing life. He's not asking for killing yourself. He's only asking for not creating new lives. So this also runs counter to antinatalism. These are the problems the paper brings about in claiming that when Benatar says that he's solving mere addition problem, that is not correct. Again, I also have opinion on this, not a well thought opinion, obviously. So I'll wait for somebody like Benatar to respond to this.